You ever heard climate change and terrorism in the same sentence? No, this isn't going to be some conspiracy theory, and no, it's not really a way to get you more scared about terrorism, although when I first heard about it, that's what I thought. I thought, oh no, somebody wants to make us feel, even give us another reason why we should be terrified of terrorism. But here, let me tell you about this, because this is a new report that just came from a think tank. And actually, it makes a lot of sense. Now, climate change, of course, as you know, is a change in global or regional climate patterns, weather patterns, attributed primarily to the increase in carbon dioxide that's produced by our use of fossil fuels. So, now I know some of you are thinking that climate change doesn't exist, but let's just put that aside for today. So, this think tank report talks about how terrorists exploit natural disasters and climate change, which cause food and water shortages. Because, of course, when there's a lack of water, there's a lack of an ability to grow food. So it also affects people's livelihood, because people who are involved in things that, like farmers, for example, people who are involved in things that for which they need the resources that aren't there because of climate change, are obviously out of a job. So how do terrorists use this to their advantage? Well, let me give you some examples of this and how terrorists are turning natural resources into weapons of war. So, for example, in Nigeria, Boko Haram. Boko Haram is taking full advantage of the fact that Nigeria's climate change is causing water and food shortages, and it's near economic collapse, and it has a weak government, and so the terrorists have rushed in particularly into this area where the climate change has affected Nigeria the worst, and they have been able to recruit people to become terrorists because the people are so desperate. They feel that their life is going to be over, and the promises that the terrorists make seem much more attractive. I mean, these people feel like they have nothing to lose. They're living day to day. And I spent time in Africa on safari, and I would want to recommend to you that sooner rather than later, you take a safari in Africa too. First of all, the continent is beautiful. It's like living in a magical world. And unfortunately, it's becoming less and less safe to travel around there, at least particularly in certain places like Nigeria. But it's a wonderful place to go. And yes, the general population does not have access to air conditioning or frozen food or Perrier. So they are so out in the wild, so to speak. They are so dependent upon things that they need, natural resources, and that are affected by climate change. Syria is another example. The war has been going on for years, and it has also been their worst drought in years. And the terrorists have taken advantage of Syria, of the drought in Syria, in a different way, by taxing water and building up fundraising for their cause. Afghanistan, the terrorists are using in a different way, or are able to exploit there in another way because of climate change, and that is, before ISIS and all that, there were already local conflicts about water and land, and it makes it a very ripe environment for terrorists, all this unrest, for terrorists to come in and exploit it. Now, I'm not saying, and the report isn't saying, that climate change has caused terrorism, but it is making environments that are much more amenable to terrorism thriving. Now, we're also not saying that terrorists have caused climate change, although that would make great headlines if we could prove that, but no. That's not happening, but it is the other way around. These environments, because of these problems and this sense of hopelessness and desperation, are causing people to go along with in the ways in which the terrorists are making use of this, exploiting this problem. So, in California, for example, we've been having drought. Now we just had a bunch of rain this winter, but did that make terrorists more plentiful in California? That's yet to be seen. You may live in a place where the climate change has affected your conditions, and I guess you have to look around to see whether your neighbors maybe are being more vulnerable to terrorism. But if not that, they certainly may be becoming more vulnerable to feeling hopeless and desperate and creating other kinds of crimes, white collar or otherwise.